Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us this morning on what I think is going to be a really interesting subject. I'm Andrew Thomas. I'm the publisher of Communicate magazine. The webinar is on how do companies engage remote workers through internal communications, and we're delighted to be joined by some very, very strong speakers on this subject. Kicking off the webinar, we will have Jess Roberts, who is a strategist at Synergy. We'll also be joined by David Hamilton, who's Director of Communications and Marketing from the Scouts, and Hannah Moss, who is Group Communications Manager with Wilmot Dixon. I think one of the things that we all know is that the challenge over the next decade is going to be ensuring that communications is effective with our internal audience. A fair amount of research is showing that things like most internal workforces are saying that loneliness, for example, is one of the strongest challenges facing companies. But there are so many other challenges as well. One of the things that we're going to be exploring today is what those challenges are and how organisations can help address them. I'm going to start by letting Jessica put the conversation into context. Jess, over to you for you to let us know exactly some of those challenges with reaching out to remote workers.
Thanks, Andrew. I'm really thrilled to be part of the webinar, not least because it's a subject that many businesses have not quite cracked yet, but also because it's a challenge that lots of our clients come to us with, which puts me in the lovely position of being able to share my experience from all sorts of industries with everyone today. As a strategist at Synergy Creative, my job is to get under the skin of our clients' challenges, understand what's really going on, and then work in partnership with them to find solutions that will ultimately engage and inspire their colleagues. With more and more people choosing to work remotely and many jobs just by their very nature demanding remote working, this is something that we need to put real effort into. We need to build a solid strategy around it and turn that strategy into everyday actions. And the first step in that process, for me personally, is about understanding. We need to understand the challenge. So, what do we mean by remote workers? A very simple definition tells us that a remote worker is simply someone who works outside of a traditional office environment. Easy, right? Well, you'll all know better than I the uniqueness of your business, the things that make you different, and that's certainly true when considering the type of remote workers you have within your business. We need to consider all of these factors. There are a few key things that I personally consider when trying to understand a remote audience, and it may be helpful for you guys to think through some of these too. So, to help me understand what makes this group of colleagues remote, I think about geography. Are your colleagues remote simply because of the location in which they work? Are they physically distanced from your business? Technology. Are they digitally remote? And by that, I mean they don't have the opportunity to access business information, systems, or maybe connect with people through technology. Hours of work. Are they working unsociable hours, shifts, flexible hours, which mean that they're often unavailable during traditional office hours? Job role. Does the type of job they do demand by its very nature that they work remotely? This is probably the most common scenario you'll come across and can cover anything from train drivers to engineers to emergency services, from logistics and warehouse workers to retail and manufacturing. The list is kind of never ending there. And then finally, independence. And this touches on what you've said a moment ago, Andrew, about the loneliness factor. Are your remote workers working alone or in teams? It's an important one to think through because the level of remoteness can feel even more intense if colleagues are consistently working independently. I personally find it helpful to think through each of these points because it really helps me build a picture in my head of who is in that remote worker audience. No two audiences and no two businesses are the same, and this really helps to contextualize the challenge and make it really specific to the business. So as Andrew mentioned, we'll hear shortly from Hannah Moss of Wilmot Dixon and David Hamilton of the Scouts. But before we do, let's look at some of the numbers that sit behind remote workers, because that really helps us build a picture too. So looking at some of these, first up, 70% of remote workers feel left out of the workplace. Is anyone surprised by that? Personally, I'm not. As communicators or HR professionals, what does that tell us? It tells us that something is broken. Remote workers, in the most part, do not feel included. And if they don't feel included, it's reasonable to assume they probably don't feel valued either. And in this scenario, the biggest risk to the business is retention, keeping hold of those talented people. Next, should we go back? Slide. Thank you. Next, the Office for National Statistics say that the number of UK workers who have moved into remote working has increased by nearly 250,000 in the last 10 years. And that's a trend that's just not slowing down. In fact, many people more and more are expected to work in this way, whether it's an effort to get a better work and life balance or the need to juggle personal commitments. This is now more the rule rather than the exception. And as the rule, this means only one thing, that for businesses, the percentage of remote workers currently within that workforce is highly likely to grow over the next few years. The stakes will only go up. But it's not all doom and gloom. There's a nice statistic there that comes from the Remotely Interested report that was published earlier this year, which says 36% of remote workers view their managers as the most informative and accurate channel. This provides us with a lovely opportunity to grow the comm skills and capabilities of managers. If they are seen as the most informative and accurate channel, then we should make the most of that. We should equip them with the skills, information and tools they need that will help them engage their workforce. This is exactly how we supported one of our clients in the housing sector. Working with groups of managers, we worked closely to co-create a comms toolkit that supported them to have meaningful conversations with their teams. We made the most of those managers. The toolkit gave them tips, hints on how to communicate well, and also conversation guides for managing really tricky subjects. It acted as a ready-made resource for managers to call upon and made their lives really easy. But mostly it supported the key business objective of keeping colleagues informed and involved in what was happening in the business. Now, I won't talk through all of the stats here, but I do think it's important to highlight the role of technology and how that is being relied upon more and more to connect remote workers. There's no doubt that there are many plus points to tech. Firstly, it can bring us all closer together. It makes distance an inconvenience rather than an absolute barrier. And it puts everything, or can put everything we need at our fingertips. Information, news, policy, systems, everything is instantly opened up. But tech can also impact well-being. And there's a stat at the bottom of the slide there. Cardiff University found that 44% of remote workers find it hard to relax and unwind after work. That's not a huge surprise to me in an always-on society, but it is something that as communicators and HR professionals we should be really mindful of. Tech can't provide all of the answers, and if we rely on it too heavily, there are real consequences. My learning here is to make sure you never default to tech. Sometimes it feels like the easy option, and yes, there are benefits, but equally there's no shame in using more traditional mediums like print. I worked with a big retailer to segment their audiences and create a set of employee personas. They had people in stores, head office, warehouses, and out on the roads, all sorts of scenarios that they were working in. But in taking the time to talk with their people, understand the data, and craft authentic employee personas, we discovered that those who were the hardest to reach just wanted no-frills comms. They didn't want fancy apps or websites. They wanted posters on the notice boards and quick snapshots of info, all printed. Investing in anything else would have been a huge waste of money. So, if this is the context, why are we all keen to crack the remote workers challenge? Well, there are obvious benefits to business. Some of these on the slide may apply to you. if not all of them. But the fact is, 70% of remote workers feel left out in the workplace. They're not engaged. Yet we know that engaged workforces outperform their peers by 147%. Now, that's the real business reason to connect your remote workers. That's the real return on investment right there. Before I hand over to David, Andrew, I think we have a poll that we'd like to ask everyone to take part in.
We do, yes. Let me see if I can get that up on screen now. Actually, I think that we're going to have to do that from the office. If you can put the poll up now, please, Annie. Here we go. Now, if people can click on which one of those questions. How well do you know your internal audience? I can see one of you has clicked on that, but let's see if we can get a little bit more audience participation. That's coming along. Incidentally, if everyone, I must say, I found Jess's presentation absolutely fascinating there. I'm sure many of you have got questions. If you look on your screen, you've got the opportunity to ask questions there. Please do. We're going to ask questions. We're going to go to the audience at the end of the webinar, and we will have some questions there. So, okay, there we go. Let's share some of these. Okay. Can you share those the answers there, please, Annie? Here we go. Share vote percentage with attendees. Here we go. No, there we go. If we can just click on those again, I think back in the office they closed the poll before we'd finished sharing the attendees there. As we can see there, as you'd expect, I think, Jess. Oh, Jess, you've got your microphone on muted there. If you can unmute your microphone, Jess, to hear a bit of your thoughts on that. As we're coming up with those statistics there, I would have thought that probably the bulk of the people beaming in on this webinar probably should be a little bit better. These are, after all, people who are taking this subject seriously. But are these statistics what you'd think they would be?
I think the pressures for internal comms and HR professionals are really intense these days, actually, and just finding the time to really get to know audiences can be really difficult. So I think, I always think be kind to yourself. There's always learning and work we can do. But it's encouraging to see that the numbers are starting to sway a little bit more to the I know them well and personalised comms. But yeah, it seems as though there's still a bit of work to do, but it's encouraging signs.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Well, I know for a fact, Jess, that we've got some questions, but we're going to save those through for the end of the webinar. But again, everyone else, if you want to ask questions, then please feel free. Thanks very much for that. That was a really insightful presentation. Incidentally, everyone, if you want to beam in and review this webinar or pass it on to any colleagues, then feel free to send through the link. We'll be saving it and archiving it after the end. We're going to now move on to our next speaker, who is, let me just close that poll there we go, thank you very much, Jess. We're going to move on to David Hamilton, who is the Director of Communications and Marketing with the Scouts. David, good morning, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, Andrew, good afternoon everyone. Really pleased to be able to join you on the webinar this afternoon. I'm David, I'm Director of Comms and Marketing at the Scouts, and previously I worked at a charity called Action for Children. So the Scouts has 640,000 members across the UK, in virtually all corners of the UK, England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, and 160,000 of those are volunteers who are working remotely and require the right kind of information to do their, to run Scouts basically in a safe and good quality way. We also have about 150 remote field-based staff, which we have to communicate to as well. And then before that, I was at Action for Children. They had around 7,500 staff, and most of those were frontline workers. So they didn't really have access to computers on a regular basis. They were working with children and young people and families on the ground on a regular basis. All I'd say is all workplaces and cultures are different. and things that work in one place may not work in another. But it's always good to share these things, I think, because there might be a few gems that you go away with after the webinar and think, oh, actually, I might be able to do something here. However, looking at the poll, it was really heartening to see that nearly half of you guys said that you knew your people well, and hopefully you'll be able to share some of your expertise as well in the attendee chat. And also keen to get your questions as well, which you can also type in, as Andrew said there. So just to tell you what happened, so when I arrived at Scouts, I suppose we had a lot of channels which covered a lot of people. There wasn't much segmentation, and we used an approach which I nicknamed spray and pray, where you needed to get something out, so you'd stick it out on an email, whether that be to staff or volunteers. You'd send it out to loads of people and hope that the relevant people that needed to see that message would read it. Very technology bias and very, very much email bias. So I don't know if any of that rings true to your experiences when you joined your organisations, but it's certainly something that I was keen to get to grips with when I started. I'm just going to, can we advance? Oh no, I can do it. I can advance the slide here. The first thing I did when I arrived, and I'm sure your experiences will be the same, is undertook some research. And this is really key, understanding where you're strong and where to improve, understanding the different needs of different groups of staff or volunteers in our case. So lots of those volunteers have different roles, they have different needs, they're online at different times, and some of them didn't actually have access to IT equipment. So working out how we could cater to those. And then benchmarking our performance, not just against previous years here, but also what other benchmarking externally is there. So from a staff perspective, for example, we sign up to Investors in People, which I'm sure many other people on the call do as well. And that's quite helpful because we can benchmark staff engagement and various other parts of our organisational development strategy against other similar organisations. Also, as people come in, thinking about your inductions, asking new team members what has worked for them elsewhere has been really valuable to us. So we've got some real gems from people who've come from competitors or from other organisations that say, actually, we used to do this and it worked really well for us. And also understanding sort of current barriers, myths and legends. So this is something that I was really keen to understand as soon as I came into the Scouts. So I wanted to meet with as many people as I could and ask them, what does it feel like to be out in the field? So I'd be curious to know if any of these examples you've come across as well, but these are the kind of things that I was hearing. But perhaps you could share some of the barriers that you've heard in the chat box as well. But common things that I've come across in all the organisations that I work with, particularly if you're field-based, is they feel the centre is not in touch with what's happening on the ground where they are, or they say they don't know what's going on at the headquarters. They don't feel informed enough, or they don't understand. They don't think we understand that they would need a different solution, or that they feel unique in some way because of where they're based. And finally, one thing that we suffered from here is people felt completely bombarded with emails, and therefore they didn't know what was most important for them to engage with. So please do share some of your reflections in the chat as well. I'll be very keen to see what you've come across. Now, hopefully the slide will change. So after the research phase, we wanted to okay, so what are we going to do about this stuff? So my reflections from the conversations and research that we had at the Scouts was that we really needed to actually reduce the amount of communication that was going out from the centre, which seems counterintuitive, but actually there was so much going out that people just didn't know what was important, and our key messages were getting completely lost. We also wanted to simplify things. So for some reason, I mean, we're a children's charity, but when we get behind a computer to start writing a paper or an email, we turn into a kind of management consultants, and we're using quite technical language, which just wasn't engaging to frontline workers. And finally, segmentation was key to us. So grouping members of staff and volunteers together by their role and needs. So we would make sure that the right communication got to the right person at the right time. Another key thing for us was minimizing the amount of interruptions. So communications would come out at various times in the day. people, particularly frontline workers or field-based staff, are trying to get on with their BAU stuff and felt that these constant interruptions were quite distracting. So actually finding time where people would know to expect communications from us was really important. Creating moments and making those moments count. So moments to celebrate success, moments where people can meet face to face, moments where the chief exec will go out and talk to people and listen to people was really important. So we introduced our monthly staff meetings where we encourage people from all around the organisation to submit kind of topics or agenda items. We broadcast that out using technology, but at a time where people can come away from their day-to-day jobs for an hour and tune in at different sites, or if they're remote-based, they can use their work equipment to tune into that. We have an anonymous question system, which is brave, but essentially that comes up on a big screen behind the chief exec, and any question that someone wants to ask, we will ask it. So it can be a town hall, but also we have presentations from around the organisation to try and make people feel that they know what's going on in different parts of the organisation. It's really important that that is shared amongst those out in the field as well. So it's not just a series of presentations from headquarters. It feels like it's a real full team meeting. Another really key thing, and I guess for me, the one thing that if you could take away anything from these points, is the investment in middle management. So our research showed that people most trusted messages that were delivered from their manager, and actually getting the cascade right, so how messages cascade from senior management and other parts of headquarters down to those on the ground is really key. And our middle managers were absolutely key to that. So not only have we developed them in communication skills and leadership skills, but actually we've also made them accountable for how engaged their staff are as well. So when it comes to things like IIP, we get very, very specific reports which show each area of the organisation how we're doing and what areas they need to improve on. And we do that through all of our evaluation and research. We also mapped the employee journey from everywhere from pre-induction, so from the point of appointment to exit, and what are the different stages of someone's journey through the organisation and what's the information they need at a particular time, which has been quite helpful. And finally, there's lots of thoughts about how we make communication more two-way, so people feel that it's not just broadcast from the centre, but actually they have a voice and we're listening as well. A few things that work for me, finally, before we get in, before I hand over to Hannah, who's got some more tactical examples of what they've done in their workplace. Reducing the volume of comms, but making each communication count. So actually, we are pushing back a lot on various people at headquarters that feel that their message is the most important thing, but actually prioritising what goes out to people and what level of information that each person needs. That's been a quite interesting cultural change for us here, where the previous culture was everyone would submit something, it would all go in a big long email and go out to people. So it's more sophisticated, and I'm sure you guys have also come across those kind of challenges in your workplaces as well. Using technology in webinars appropriately, but as Jez said, we don't default to tech all the time, but actually when you have remote staff, sometimes that technology can really enable good engagement. At Action for Children, we didn't have many IT-based staff out in the field, so we used video, and in fact, because our network was poor in certain areas, we actually sent out DVDs at some point because we knew that every children's centre or school would have a DVD player, and we would use video to let people see what else was going on around the organisation, hear directly from the chief exec, try and understand in more detail things like restructures, pay reviews, things like that. Which went down really well. We'd evaluate every single one. Developing creative ideas that feels natural and less of an interruption. So Action for Children, again, was based out in children's centres, schools, fostering and adoption centres. So a lot of our internal comms were actually based on activities that some of the staff could get involved with that would be related to their role. So we did, those chooser devices, I can't explain, but used to make them at school where you'd fold paper and be able to choose things, but we'd have a corporate message on those. Those kind of things seem to go down quite well. And then balancing digital with offline communications and offline moments. So we just got our Investors in People gold. So we sent everyone out, every site and every remote worker a pack, which enabled them to go out and have a celebratory lunch. They all got Whisper Golds. There was various other things that went out. And it's just a moment to make people feel special and celebrate together. I think this is the final slide for me, which is around evaluation and feedback. So just some reflections. I'm sure many of you are doing this already, but some thoughts about how do you actually measure employee engagement. So we have various surveys, focus groups, and Investors in People, which enables us to kind of see how we're doing at any particular time. One really interesting thing is exit interviews, particularly from remote staff. Are they being done? Are you getting the feedback centrally in comms? Are there enough questions about how we can make people feel more engaged? And what are you changing as a result? Thinking about the channels and mechanisms, not just to broadcast, but actually for people to have their say. Again, I'm sure you've all done this, but just thinking, is there any other ways that we could do that? Thinking about what does success look like. So we've been through several years of benchmarking now, and actually I think we've got a better idea of what we're aiming to get to. We've got some external accreditation with Investors in People. So I think we're clearer on that now, but sometimes people aren't, and you don't really know where you're working towards. And finally, who's accountable? So who's accountable for engaging these people? Is it the comms team? Is it the managers? Is it the senior management? In reality, it's a bit of everyone, but actually putting the accountability down to the middle managers of those various departments that you have that have got field-based staff seems to have been the most successful approach that I've taken at both Scouts and Action for Children. So that's it from me. I'll hand back to Andrew.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, David. I'm going to ask you to not mute your microphone yet. We've got a few questions, actually. I'm going to hold most of the questions till the end so that we can ask those to all of our panels. But there are a couple that are specific to you here, David, that I'm just going to quickly ask. One here is that you refer to the term moments quite frequently in your speech and in your presentation. And one of our attendees has just asked if you can give perhaps a definition or an example of what a moment might be.
Sure. So, for example, when you are launching something new, so we launched a new strategy. So rather than just sort of send that out by email or run a kind of town hall or something on it, actually we made that a moment where we could first of all reflect and celebrate on what we'd already achieved in our previous strategy, but also create an opportunity to talk to people about the strategy, have various events all coordinated around that one thing. So town halls, emails. I guess if you think about it as from an external perspective, as a campaign, but around a particular thing, but looking at your calendar throughout the year and saying, well, what are the other moments where we can bring everyone together to talk about how we're doing, what's new, what's coming up, those kind of things. So we create a moment every month, which is our staff meeting. We create a moment to celebrate things where we've done them well. We create moments where we might not be doing so well, actually. So, for example, if we're not growing as fast as we want to, then we might say, actually, rather than just bring this up in our standard comms, we're going to do something different. We're going to bring people together and talk about the problem and see how we can solve it as a team. Andrew, you're muted. Can anyone, is there anyone else there on the call? Talk amongst yourselves.
Oh, that's me. That's muted.
There you go.
No one can hear me. David, I just had one before we move on to Hannah. One last quick question there, which is that you talked about your CEO fielding the questions. One of our attendees has just asked, does the CEO actually answer all of those questions, or is there an element of screening that takes place?
So we have the luxury of having a smaller workforce than some companies, albeit we do have exactly the same system where we have our larger webinars for up to 1,000 people. He will chair the questions, but he will throw them out to experts in the room. So we don't expect him to be the expert on everything, but I think by him chairing it, it does several things. First of all, it makes the person who's asked the question feel that the chief exec has heard and listened to the point they're trying to make. And secondly, it means that then the expert in the room who knows the answer can answer it. So we get various questions. It could be anything from, you know, the brioche bun in the canteen was not vegan, to something much more strategic, like, you know, we're not growing as fast as we can. What is the organisation doing about that? So they really are kind of a random bunch of questions sometimes, but he'll listen and answer them all, or ensure someone else does.
Okay, fantastic. Well, thank you so much, David. We've got lots of questions from there, but I think we need to move on to our next speaker. We'll come back to you later on, if we may. Our next speaker, however, is Hannah Moss. She's the Group Communications Manager from Wilmot Dixon. Hannah, how are you this afternoon?
Hi, Andrew. Hopefully you can hear me okay. Thanks very much for inviting me to take part in this webinar. So I'm Hannah Moss. I'm the Group Communications Manager for Wilmot Dixon. We are a national construction company. So as you can imagine, we have the vast majority of our people working in a remote way. A lot of what I'm going to say today is probably going to link in, or hopefully really nicely, but it's going to resonate with things that Jess has said and that David has said as well. What I'm going to talk about focuses on an example, a practical example of how we have recently launched a new communications platform in order to try and streamline and engage with everybody across our business. So just to tell you a little bit, I suppose, to start about Wilmot Dixon. We are a national construction company, so we work all over the UK. We have roughly 2,400 employees across lots and lots of different locations. So we have regional offices and sub-offices. We also have, on average, about 75 projects at any one time happening across the country. So we are definitely very, very dispersed. We also have a massive drive at the moment to become even more agile in the way that we work. So we're really encouraging that part of the business. It's part of our kind of massive campaign to attract more people into the construction industry, especially get a better gender balance and appeal to more women as well. So we're really embracing that. We're even embracing agile working on our sites. So that's something we're trialing as well. So this is something that's very close to our hearts as a business. There's a lot of focus in sort of David's talk about the research that they've done at Scouts, which is fantastic. We have done research as well here at Wilmot Dixon and got a lot of feedback. I'm going to probably not focus as much on that purely because you've been listening to David talk about it, and I'll talk a little bit more about the practical applications. But a really short overview. We had an intranet in place, quite old-fashioned, I suppose, in the way it was set up on premise, very limited mobile functionality. And our people fed back that they just felt that they were getting lots and lots of messages coming through. They weren't able to access the internet in the way they'd like on more mobile devices, and they were being flooded by emails coming through from all different parts of our business, trying to convey important and more localized messages all the time. So we're combating those kind of challenges here at Wilmot Dixon. I'm just going to put up the next slide for you. Just gives you a rough idea of our kind of how our teams are dispersed across the UK. We're also combating not only this area of kind of dispersed people, but we have a lot of different preferences. It's probably quite similar in a lot of organisations, but we've got a slightly older workforce than in some organisations. People are not necessarily that comfortable or confident with using digital platforms. So something else that we had to take into account when thinking about putting a new platform in place. Working with our wider communications teams, we've got regional comms teams across our business. We came up with a bit of a plan of action to implement a new platform which would hopefully give people a flexible way to access content. So this kind of gives you, this was like actually what we used for our initial conversations of how we were going to implement this to the business. We thought about how people wanted to access their content, and we put our intranet, our newly upgraded intranet system, which we call the hub, right at the center of that. People had told us that they wanted a clear and simple way to access their content. So we made sure that our internet system was at the heart of everything they do, a central and consistent place for all our key messages, policies, and stories to live. Importantly, the new system is completely mobile responsive, so it has an app. So all of our workers, no matter where they are, no matter what device, can access that. And our key messages, our key policies, and everything are always first and foremost on our intranet system. So that's not particularly groundbreaking really in the way that we do things, but the other elements of the platform for where we've sort of really tried to reach out. Now, I should probably say we only implemented this at the end of March, so we've only been going with it for a few months, but we've had some quite positive results. Well, I'll go on to those later. What we knew is that people wanted to access content in an agile way. So we've tried to give people the flexibility to do that, and really importantly, empower people to share their stories as well as us just pushing out content all the time to them. One of the things that we have implemented as part of a rollout of Microsoft's Office 365 suite, which is a cloud-based suite of applications, is the social platform, the corporate social platform, Yammer. Some of you may be aware of that. It's very similar to Facebook Workplace. And if you're not familiar with Facebook Workplace, it's very similar to a corporate version of Facebook that we all know and love or hate. It basically allows people to chat in social groups and share updates in networks and basically have that disposable conversation. It also allows for live streaming, which we're actually going to be pushing into in the future, which we've not done yet. The way we position this is sort of giving people a place to continue the conversation. So it might be that they want to chat about the really big moments, as David put it, that we're putting out on our group intranet system. Or it may be that they want to break out into smaller groups and be able to discuss quite basic things within their site teams, but in an agile way. We've also introduced or are introducing very imminently Skype and Teams, which is an instant messaging app for people, which allows video conferencing. But again, it just gives people another option of how to be able to work without having to be physically present in a meeting. All of the things that we've introduced have apps as well. They're all mobile first led. So that's the Yammer side of things. On the other side, we've also got, as I mentioned before, more of a traditional base of people. So we didn't want to stop pushing out content to people as well in our newsletters. We've always had newsletters in place, and we're trying to migrate those newsletters to a more digital platform using things like MailChimp in order to be able to actually track the engagement with those systems. The idea being the newsletters pull people back onto the hub so they can access their content, and we post everything from the hub onto Yammer where people can chat about it. So it's a fluid system that allows people to access only sort of one truth that comes from the hub, but in lots and lots of different ways. We've also got push notifications, which we can actually, some people like a BBC app alert on their mobile phones to draw them attention to particularly important areas. Couple of the things I would say have been really successful about Yammer so far have been a couple of user cases, probably I should say, that have been quite successful. We've had some quite fun things on there. So we've had someone posted, we had a really great news story that one of our team had actually saved a dog that was struggling, almost drowning in a river. Someone had got a picture of that, and rather than having to go through this corporate process of being sent back up to one of the comms teams to write quite a lengthy story, they were able to share it straight out on Yammer, and everyone got behind it and celebrated that one of our team had done this really great thing. A more business user case has been around carpet tiles. Is incredibly engaging as that sounds. But for us, we set up a lot of site-based offices. Someone needed some carpet tiles. They posted out onto Yammer to say, guys, rather than me going out and buying a whole new load of carpet tiles, has anyone got some we could recycle? They managed to find some carpet tiles and use them for that site purpose. So those are just a couple of ways that we've been trying to give people that flexible approach to accessing content. So the next slide that I've put up, we've had a continuing piece of work really to educate people on which of the channels to use. We knew from the start in our feedback people wanted a simple approach, so we've tried to keep the platform to certain particular areas, and we've tried to run workshops and have ongoing videos and posters to let people, or give people a kind of a steer as to which of the platforms are going to work best with them. This is very much an ongoing process, but we have found that by giving people little user cases like this kind of fun poster, that at least points people in the right direction and allows them to really get the best out of the tools that we have on offer. As I said, we've made videos as well, and parts of the business have actually started to roll out workshops, which we will be continuing to roll out across the business to really get people face-to-face more confident on digital, which I think is really important. Face-to-face should never be underestimated, especially not when people are learning how to use things. So just to give you a brief idea of how things have worked out for us, as I said, we haven't been going all that long, so this is very much an ongoing process, but 70% of our people have already joined the Yammer platform. And when we launched it, it was very much, we didn't really know what to expect. We didn't know if it was going to be a great success or whether it might be too much. You know, people might not want to embrace digital on that kind of level, but we have seen a really great response. We've had over 160 groups set up. People are very much empowered to set their own groups up. We've not kept that as kind of an admin role. That's every single person who's a user can set up a group, and we've had conversations ongoing. We've had 32% of our people who are accessing Yammer are accessing it via a mobile device. Now, it might not sound like huge numbers, but on our old intranet system, 1% of people were on the mobile app. I mean, it was a clunky mobile app, but it just shows the difference. If you give people the tools, they will really embrace them. Looking at our intranet system itself, 3% are accessing it via mobile. So we've got a little way to go, I think, on the education piece around that. But again, it's a 2% increase from where we were. We're also seeing overall from the Yammer platform to our intranet platform a 12% click-through rate, which is very positive so far. It shows that at least there is that flow of information. If we post a story out, people are coming back to read it, which is positive. But the most positive stat is that we've had an increase of over 40% of views on our news stories as a whole on our intranet platform, which I was actually really, really pleasantly surprised when I read that, because it does show that whether or not they're accessing them via Yammer, whether they're accessing them being pushed back from newsletters, or whether they're going sort of just directly to have a browse of the internet system, they're actually viewing the messages, which is the most important thing. And actually, I haven't put the stat on here, but the dwell rate has really increased as well. So we know that people are actually reading through them. So hopefully that gives a bit of an idea of maybe some ideas that you guys could apply to it. As I say, I focus very much on the digital kind of hands-on side of what we've done with the comms platform to complement what the others have said. But it's certainly working out well for us so far, and we're going to be continuing monitoring this, monitoring all of the different parts of the platform, which are all measurable. And then our plan going forward is to adapt that. So if we see that, you know, the newsletters maybe are dropping off because people are going to Yammer more, we know we can focus on coming up with more innovative ideas around Yammer, potentially pushing out into live streaming on Yammer. If we see that isn't the case, again, we can continually learn and improve to concentrate on other parts of the platform.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Hannah. We have just been inundated with questions. I actually don't think we're going to get around to answering all the questions on this call, but what we will do is when we archive the presentation and archive this, we're going to add a link through which will enable people to see some written answers and responses to the questions that they asked. But we have got time for some questions, and I'm going to ask those now. Again, as with David, I've got a couple that are specific for you, Hannah, and then I'm going to take some out to the wider group of presenters. First, one question here. You talked, Hannah, about how people are using using Yammer, and you've had kind of a fantastic uptake on that. Presumably, people are using their personal mobiles to access this. And your intranet too. But have you found that the investment in the intranet and in those apps has led to more employees asking for work mobiles?
That's a good question. We actually, the majority of our employees have work mobiles anyway. We have actually a piece of work that's being rolled out at the moment to ensure that everybody has a smartphone. But a lot of people use their personal mobiles. I mean, actually, I do myself. I access it via my personal mobile. So I don't think that I haven't seen anyway that it's had a direct impact on more work mobiles being requested, but that is an important part of a fundamental part of our strategy anyway, to ensure that people are completely connected, because if they don't have a smartphone, for example, then they're really going to miss out on the digital platform and being able to use it in the way it's designed.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you very much. Really good. Thank you to all of our speakers. I'm going to ask some questions now to the wider group. Now, one question here is focusing on content, really, and I think I'm going to start this one off with you, Jess, if I may. With internal communications, there's this common misconception that comms is about pushing content. I think one of the things that we heard earlier is that there's much more to it than that, and the overlap with human resources is very clear. What one of our attendees wanted to know was, how can organisations tackle that overlap and work alongside human resources to make their comms strategy more powerful?
That's a great question. I think for me, my experience is that the currency of communication is relationships, and what that means for HR teams and for communications professionals is that you need to invest in those relationships, spend time investing in those relationships, because they will be worth it in the long run, and ultimately feed everything back to your business objectives. If you can do that and make a clear connection to what it is the business is trying to achieve and how you plan to achieve that together, you've got a bit of a shared goal there, and that always helps to kind of focus the mind and solidify some of that collaborative practice.
Okay, fantastic. Do either of you other two want to comment on that question? Don't worry if not, we've got many other questions to ask. So one of them here as well, which it's less about factory, I suppose, but could be relevant to Hannah too. One of our attendees asked, what's the best way to reach out to factory-based blue-collar employees? Because after all, they've got fixed work hours, fixed break times. How do you look out for the best time to engage them? I think I'm going to go to both you, Hannah, but we'll start with Jess, because presumably, Hannah, with some of your construction workers, you're going to have that same issue of fixed break times. They may not necessarily be based in a factory, but a building site probably has the same kind of issues. But let's start off again with Jess. What do you think some of the best ways to engage, looking at the best times as well?
Yeah, it's interesting that, and it makes me think of some of the work that I referenced earlier in the presentation with one of the big retailers, and ultimately it's about really understanding what the workday looks like for those individuals, but having conversations with them, what motivates them, what are they interested in, what do they care about in work, and how do they feel about some of the comms channels that are already available. There's no point investing in what you've already got if it's not working. So and we can't make suggestions based on our gut feel or our assumptions. So for me, it would be, take the time to get to know your people, have those conversations with them. If you can, really, spend some time shadowing them, measure what it is they do, how they do things on a day-to-day basis, because that's when you'll really start to understand the reality of their day job. And if you can then feed that into some some customer profiles or some internal employee profiles, then you're going to be starting to work with evidence and making decisions based on that information.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jessica. Hannah, how about you?
Yeah, I agree with what Jess said there, really. I mean, I would say have a flexible approach. So a bit like we're trying to do with our comms platform, we've got several different channels to allow people to access things, and just make sure everything you do is measurable. Obviously, on top of what Jess is saying about engaging and feedback, which is great, I just like to see the data. You know, it can be quite clear then if you get certain times when people are engaging more, or certain channels which people are engaging with more, and then just obviously just continually adapt and improve to you know, based on what you find.
Fantastic. Thanks very much there, Hannah. David, I think you might have a few thoughts on this as well.
Yeah, just a couple of reflections of what's worked for me. So I worked for local government for 10 years, and actually our bin collectors were a really hard to reach group because they start work at 4 in the morning and finish at 11 or 12 in the afternoon. So we also have a warehouse at Scouts as well, which again are slightly harder to engage employees. Face-to-face was really important, so we absolutely prioritised face-to-face. We made time for it in their working day, so they weren't asked to come in early without being paid or go home late without being paid for it. Tailoring comms was really important for that group. A lot of the time they didn't feel they knew how they fit in. I'm just a warehouse person, or I'm just a bin collector, was often the same, that response. So actually helping them understand where they fit into the overall organisational strategy, why what they do really does make a difference. And then exactly as Jess said, understanding what their motivations are. So in fact, for one of the sessions we ran with the bin collectors, we got the chief exec in at 4:45 in the morning with bacon rolls, because that's what they asked for, that's what they wanted. Gave a very short presentation on our strategy at the time, took questions, and even though it was only sort of 20-minute session, actually they all walked away feeling that they'd been listened to, and that the chief exec had made time out of his schedule to come along that early in the morning to see them.
Okay, thanks very much, David. I think we've got time probably for one more question now. But please, if you've got any more questions, feel free to ask them now. We will be asking all of our speakers these questions, and we will make sure that they answer. If not necessarily on air, we'll get some written responses back. But I got a good question here, which is, I suppose, finishing with a starting question, really. The best way to get started with engaging remote-based employees. I think, you know, all too often we look at these kind of strategies that are in place, but maybe that first move, arguably, Jess, one could say just pick up the phone and get in touch with Synergy. But I'm sure there are other thoughts that everyone might have to have. Let's kind of go in reverse order. Hannah, best way to sort of kickstart off your remote-based comms strategy?
I think you've got to start with the situation analysis. Where are you now? You know, where are you now? What's the feedback that people are saying? So actually get out there, talk to people, work out what people want. So when you've actually formulated your situation of where you are now, you can then look to the biggest win that you can have, or the easiest win that you can have, and kind of just put a bit of a plan together. I mean, I'm a big believer in mapping things out, making sure, as I said before, that things are measurable. But I would always start from looking at exactly where you are now, and then coming up with a plan of action for going forward.
Fantastic, thanks, Hannah. David, how about you? Any tips on that beginning of a campaign?
Yeah, I think I'd agree with Hannah. Situational awareness, some research, talking to people, find out what's working at the moment, because some stuff might be and what's not. Test out some messages. What are people hearing, or importantly, what aren't people hearing? And then you can start to identify what some of the blockages are. I'd also say be clear on what you're trying to achieve from the start. So what are you trying to do? Is it about helping people be clearer about where they fit into the organisation? Is it performance stuff? Is it organisational development? Is it all of those? Because I think all of those require slightly different approaches and strategies. But there's no one-size-fits-all approach to this, because every organisation has a slightly different culture and slightly different challenges. But I'd just come back to that point about middle managers. Try and find out if your cascade, the way information flows through the management structure, is working well or not.
Great, thanks very much, David. And finally, Jessica, let's have the final thoughts from you. How would you recommend someone kicks off their remote work communication strategy?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely agree with everything David and Hannah have said about knowing your baseline. What is it that people currently know, feel, and do in their role? What is it that they need from communication? So yeah, be clear on measurement, be clear on the opportunities to get to know your people, but just take it back to basics. Get in front of them, have a conversation, take the time to kind of reconnect with some of the roles that maybe, if you're working in an office, in the comms team or the HR team, you might not see the reality of everyday life, whether it's out on the digging holes or driving trains or in a warehouse. Go and have some conversations and spend time with those colleagues.
Fantastic, thank you. Some great thoughts there. Thank you, everybody, to all of our speakers: David Hamilton from the Scouts, Hannah Moss from Wilmot Dixon, and Jessica Roberts from Synergy. Thank you for all of your insight. Thank you also to all of those who've listened in. If you want to let your colleagues know about this, or to a wider audience, this will be available from our website, communicatemagazine.com. I've been Andrew Thomas. I'm the publisher of Communicate Magazine. Delighted to hold this this webinar. A big thank you to Synergy for making sure it could happen. Thank you, everybody. Goodbye.